I've been given this wonderful job of introducing these people because I care about schools and teachers, and this book, which is a book that contains the voices of high school students, is really quite beautiful to read and actually very wise. So as a teacher, I appreciate it for its beauty, the words of students, and the wisdom is in the pages. Let me tell you a bit about Kathleen Cushman. I feel like I'm going in and out. It's because I'm moving. Bob, is this okay? Kathleen Cushman is a journalist by trade and has been working in schools and writing about them since 1989. She's worked with the Coalition of Essential Schools, and we're very lucky to have Nancy Sizer here, as well as Steve Seidel. Faculty is here. She's worked with the Coalition of Essential Schools and was an editor at Horace, a magazine which I'm sure most or all of you know. She also wrote a journal called the Challenge Journal, which followed the work of the schools in the Annenberg Challenge during the late 90s and from 1995 to 2000. Now, after all those years of writing about high schools, she decided there was a very glaring and missing perspective. So in the year 2000, with her colleague Barbara Servone, she started a small nonprofit which is called What Kids Can Do, WKCD. The entire mission of this organization is to bring forward the voices of teenagers, of adolescents, on important issues that have to do with their lives and their learning, particularly the voices of adolescents without privilege. Kathleen's focus is working directly with these adolescents. She'll, I'm sure, tell you more about her process, but she interviews and writes and travels all over the country, writing books that bring forward the views of young people on the learning in their lives. The first of her books was the book which she'll be talking about tonight, Fires in the Bathroom, Advice for Teachers from High School Students. We've used this book in the teacher education program here, and students carry it to their first year of teaching as a useful tool to get to know their students better. The advice in this book is really wonderful to read. After doing this book, Kathleen went on to write another book, which is coming out in the spring, coming from Next Generation Press, and it's called We Can't Tell You. And she's also she's a very prolific writer. She's currently writing another book, a sequel, which is called Sent to the Principal, Advice for Principals. As I said, Kathleen's traveled around the country and worked in schools, in urban schools such as Oakland and LA and Philadelphia and New York and Chicago, and also in rural Appalachia and West Virginia, places where she has just collected the voices and talked to students about their lives. She comes from Harvard, Massachusetts, and one of the four founding parents of the Parker Charter School, which I'm sure all of you know about, which is such a wonderful and successful school here in Massachusetts. There are two students here with Kathleen tonight, and both are students who have worked with What Kids Can Do, WKCD. Sounds like a radio station. Rosa Fernandez, who worked at WKCD, graduated from the Manhattan International High School, is now a student at Wellesley, and she's on the board of WKCD. Bernice Sediston is a senior at Brighton High School, right here in Boston, and she's applying to Harvard this year. So if there's an admissions person here, please take note that we have a very bright young activist in our midst who is applying. The wisdom of these young people shines through the pages of Fires in the Bathroom. We have very much to learn from the students we teach. It's about the potential power, or the real power, of students. I mean, it's amazing, the wisdom that you see in these pages. In Kathleen's book, the voices of young people shine and teach us and make the reader recognize the power and the wisdom of the children who are all too often silent in the seats in high schools in America. I'm someone who cares a lot about teachers and about the power that teachers have to change schools. Kathleen has given voice to students and power to students. I believe that when teachers raise their voices, they are powerful, and clearly when students raise their voices, they're powerful too. We thank you so much for coming today, and I'd like to introduce Kathleen Cushman and turn the evening over to her.
Thank you. Thank you for coming out tonight. this rainy night when there's a baseball game going on too. I appreciate it. Tonight I'll be talking with you about the reasons for talking with teenagers about their thoughts and lives and opinions, the risks and the rewards of talking to all of you who are sitting out there and sitting here. The kinds of things that we hear from when we talk to students about schools are sometimes about school culture, sometimes about curriculum and instruction, and sometimes about school structure, the big things, how schools are shaped. We'll be talking about all those things. The questions that I ask of students, the questions that I asked in Fires in the Bathroom, fall into categories that have to do with curriculum and instruction mostly, because it was a book of advice for teachers. So kids talked about their relationships with teachers and their teachers' relationships with them. They talked about motivation and engagement, about the academic material that they were studying and their relationship with that material. And they talked about expectations, performance, assessment, things like that. Bernice Feddeston and Rosa Fernandez both have worked with What Kids Can Do, although not for What Kids Can Do, but they've been among the students that have worked with us on various projects. And in many ways, they sit here tonight standing in for hundreds, really, of invisible students who are not here in the room tonight. And they stand in for male students and female students of all different ethnicities. The only thing I can really say about the students that I interview is none of them come from backgrounds of real privilege. They stand in for Jose, who grows one of his fingernails very long because he loves to play the guitar, and he knows that growing your fingernail that long is also being taken by some as a symbol of cocaine use, but he refuses to cut his fingernail because his guitar matters more to him than what people might think about that. So they stand in for Maria, who's very bored in high school in Houston, whose parents, neither of whom went beyond 3rd or 4th grade and work in fast food restaurants, but who after school goes every day to babysit for an autistic child and is being trained as an aide to that child and learning far more in the 30 hours a week she puts in at that job than she is learning in the classroom. They stand in for Janelle, a student in the Bronx, who was told about a week before she went back to 10th grade that she had been reassigned to a small school that had been broken up from a large school in the Bronx, large high school, where they're breaking up large high schools into small ones, and that now she would be going to a high school with a theme of preparing for the teaching profession, when her great interest is growing up to be a lawyer. They stand in for Vance, who grew up in Harlem and was deeply engaged in reading all his life and was absolutely immersed in reading Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time, but who left school so that he wouldn't have to take the New York exit exams, and instead took the GED and made his way to college from there. So there are dozens of stories. In fact, every time I go into a room with a lot of kids that I don't know, I really only get to spend a few days with the students that I work with. And I always go in thinking, quite aware of the fact that the students are strangers to me. As you all sitting in your 2 rows, they are strangers to me. And I always leave just thinking that we've got to keep in touch, and please call me and come stay with me, and won't you, can't we spend some more time together? And I think that one of the things I've learned is really how individual each student is, and how sad it is that high schools in general don't have the structures that allow them to be known as well as they should be known. So, how many of you here are teachers? And how many are preparing to be teachers? And how many are students? And from the community? And any other things that I'm forgetting? No. So, in many ways, I'm talking tonight to teachers and asking the question, why is it useful for an educator to sit down and listen to high school kids about what they think would make their schools better? After all, teachers are taught and do research and study the brain science, the research on cognition that teaches them how students learn. The studies, they're quite familiar with the studies on achievement. They're well versed in the classroom strategies that have been proven to work well with students. And students are adolescents. They're possibly filled with ideas that haven't been so developed. They're possibly impulsive and thinking more about their own today than some faraway tomorrow. And they have a natural tendency to resist, to push back against the authority of the school. And so why should educators then consult them about how schools could be better? I think that before we can answer that, we have to think hard about what it means to learn, how we learn. And through our own common sense, our own experience, and also through research, we know that learning often will take place when one makes a relationship with the person that has something to teach you. I remember in high school I had an after-school job at a print shop, and I was very bored in high school by everything except boys. But every day after school I went to this job at a print shop where the boss taught me how to do everything having to do with setting type, putting out a newspaper, printing wedding invitations, running a press, all the things, making rubber stamps with a rubber stamp machine, all the things that over the course of 30 or 40 hours a week I learned how to do. And I think that teacher was responsible because he had something to teach me and we had a relationship, was really more responsible for what happened to me in my life than anybody else in my teenage years. We also know that no matter what we're supposed to be learning, the process of learning always connects with some basic questions about ourselves, about the questions that we're asking ourselves in the background, kind of, who am I? What do I want to be doing? What does this person think of me? How do you all perceive me, and what do you all expect of me? That's always going on in the background, too, as we form these relationships with people. So if we want students to go on and learn things, achieve, do well, whether they're doing well in life or doing well on tests, we have to start by making relationships with them. So that would be the most dependable way that we can understand the answers that they're asking, that each of us asks when we're put into a learning situation, the questions about who we are and where we're coming from and where we're going. So we could change all kinds of things about school. We could change their structures, we could change their assessment systems, we could change the method of instruction, we could change the curriculum. And if we don't pay attention to the relationships that we're making with adolescents in school, we're putting a real obstacle in front of the reforms that we want to carry out in schools, the ways that we want to make schools better. So it's a very pragmatic reason that we want to talk to kids, to form the relationships so that the things that we work out to make schools better can happen. And the more that we acknowledge that students are coming from a different perspective from our own, and that they often have competing agendas with adult agendas, the better our chances are of making progress on the things that matter. You might rightly ask, matter to whom? That's the question. That's really the question. So listening to students is the work of What Kids Can Do, this small nonprofit organization that operates out of my living room and Barbara Cervone's study, and in which we go out and talk to kids and put that power into their hands of looking into their own learning, figuring out what is going on with it, and then making those voices louder, bringing them out to the public in the form of books, in the form of studies, in the form of videos like the one Bernice and her fellow students made at Brighton High School, in the form of articles like the booklet that Rosa helped write from students in the Bronx who were advising on the breakup of the large high schools into small. And that's why they're here, because in standing in for these students, I'm going to be asking them to actually tell you some of the things that the students have said in their own voices. So right now, adults in most schools focus more on getting kids to listen to them than they focus on listening to kids. Why? What are the risks of talking respectfully to students? One risk is that students will say kind of immature things that you don't agree with. And their proposals will be unrealistic. They'll say, we want a gourmet chef. Well, we can't afford a gourmet chef. They'll say, we want to have classes in Florida when you're not going to Florida. You're going to stay here in rainy New England. And I think adults have the sense that kids will make unrealistic proposals and that their opinions won't be very developed. And then adults won't want to change things in the way that students are suggesting. And after all, adults are kind of the ones that are held responsible for what goes on in schools. And so once you open the door to talking to students, you can't shut the door. You can't just say, thank you very much for your opinion, the bell has rung, it's time for you to go home, and then go and make your decisions. It's a risk to talk to kids because they might say something that you won't be able to do. They might say something that you think is in some way irresponsible to do. Another reason that adults don't talk to students respectfully in schools is that they think it might be a waste of time when there's only so much time in school and kids have to study the academic subjects and they're going to be tested, and the most important thing is clearly to get that education in math, science, history, literature, world languages, all the things that the powers that be say are important to learn. And to that, we have to just say that if we really care that students are going to learn to use their minds by building on the things that they know, by testing out ideas, by working with evidence, by testing their own ideas against other people's ideas. All the things that Deborah Meyer has long ago identified as the habits of mind that guide all learning in a good high school. If we really believe that, then listening to what they say has got to be at least as important as the content of what they're working on. In fact, it has to go hand in hand with that content. And so, if, as one student told me, Shakespeare is Henry IV, Tiffany told me this, that Shakespeare's Henry IV is the stupidest thing that Shakespeare ever wrote. That's okay, it's her opinion. It's the stupidest thing that he ever wrote. So, okay, let's hear more about that. What makes it stupid? What are the other things he wrote? Let's test it out. In that sense, it can go hand in hand with content. And all of us have opinions about an author's works that say that this one I didn't care for these reasons, and his other thing was better, and that kind of thing. So it might sound like a pretty immature thing to say. But in fact, it can be tested, it can be probed, it can be held up to evidence, and it is a kind of learning to listen respectfully to that opinion about that play. In that sense, it goes hand in hand with content. I think we sometimes don't recognize a third risk of listening to kids, and the risk is that it will expose the gap that exists in schools between cultures. And we all know that schools are multicultural places with, we usually think of that in terms of ethnicity or class or ability, all kinds of subcultures in the school. But there's also a gap in schools between adult culture and youth culture. All schools, of course, include adult cultures and youth cultures, and each of those cultures is a valid culture. And each of those cultures holds power in different ways at different times. We know that the youth culture in a school holds the power to resist, holds the power to put your head down on the desk and go to sleep, holds all kinds of power to affect how things go in the school. And we know, of course, the kind of adult that powers wield, the kind of power that adults wield in school. The agendas of the youth culture and the adult cultures often compete with each other, but they do also have important things in common, and those things could affect student achievement. For example, what kinds of things might they have in common? Maybe a desire to spend your day doing something interesting could be something they hold in common, and that could certainly affect student achievement. So getting to those things they hold in common is a big point of talking to kids, but it's also a risk. And I know that risk pretty well, because when I go to talk with kids, I'm not a part of youth culture. I'm a grandmother. I'm no more connected to Jose's long fingernail than anybody. And in some sense, I am always having to admit my ignorance when I talk with teenagers. I'm always having to kind of say, well, what does that mean? And what's that word? And all kinds of things that make me feel a little bit like less than powerful, less than competent. I'm ignorant in youth culture. And so I have to listen in a way that acknowledges my ignorance. I mean, youth culture, like the culture of my generation of adults, gets its information from all kinds of sources, many of which I don't know. And of course, I get my information from all kinds of sources, many of which somebody who's 16 or 17 years old doesn't know. So the point of avoiding such conversation, I believe, is often to avoid feeling that ignorance. And yet it's really not fair, because we then create a situation where one culture in the school is always presumed to be ignorant, that's the youth culture, and the other culture in the school is presumed to be dominant in power. So that doesn't strike me as particularly an equitable environment in which to learn. So let's think about how that culture gap plays out by talking about what students have said to me in several areas, the areas that I mentioned before. The most personal area that has to do with school culture, the area of curriculum and instruction, and then the area that has to do with the structure of schools, sort of the larger structure of schools. And I've tried to choose examples here where the adult has one point of view. The typical adult point of view on these things in my examples is one thing, and the kid has a very different, although perhaps equally valid, point of view. And I'd like to start with something that really might not seem very related to academics, but it often comes up at the top of students' lists that they complain about at school, because it has to do with their personal expression. It starts with dress, the way people dress, but it spills over into other areas of expression, music, dance, and writing, language, that kind of thing. So let's think about dress. Is the way students dress in school a matter of dressing appropriately for the workplace? That's more or less how adults think of it. That's how adults usually frame it when they're talking about controlling what students wear to school, or what they can wear, or how they can decorate their bodies, how they present themselves in appearance. Or is dress an expression of identity and an expression of fashion? That's what most kids tell me. They're talking about, I want to wear this because it's fashionable. Well, I want to wear the things I wear because they're fashionable too. It's just that in my culture, this is fashionable. I don't, when you're 50, you don't show your belly that much. But I'm going to ask Rosa and Bernice to alternate reading out loud things that different students have been telling me about dress as I do the research for the book called Sent to the Principal, Advice for Principals from High School Students. So, Bernice, will you start?
Jose tells us, hip-hop is like a culture for us, and we love to express it. There are a lot of adults, if they see something out of the ordinary, they feel that it is gang-related, like the lifting of the pant leg, one pant leg down and the other one folded up and up to your knee. Once that was gang-related, but now it's just the style.
Kylie says, there's no lights and fireworks coming out of the clothes. Just let it be. It's just clothes. The more attention you give to it, the more kids are going to want to rebel. Teachers who feel that it is a distraction in the classroom can set limits in there. But if the teacher thinks that clothes are extremely distracting, I think the classroom should have to agree or should have a vote.
Nicole says, if you're going to work in an office, that's different, but we're still teenagers. We should wear what makes us feel comfortable. That's a big part of wanting to come to school, being comfortable here. If we don't get to be who we really are, then we're going to kind of stay closed up and we're not going to want to learn.
Apocalypse says, each student is different, and they are struggling to express that. That's one of my goals. I don't want to be looking like the person next to me. I want to stand out in a different way.
Joseph says, our teachers aren't used to seeing this new type of style emerge out of nowhere. New things are going to come as the youth emerges. Things develop, like technology, moving on every day.
So things develop, like technology, right? Fashion changes. Things that are fashionable now weren't fashionable when I was that age. So sure, there are things to discuss about how kids dress, but what if we were to enter into that discussion as an inquiry? Who is this problem of what kids wear a problem for? In what ways is it a problem? For example, adults, we could ask ourselves, why does it seem so important to us what kids wear? This might just be one of those things that people from different cultures feel different about. Or we could ask kids things like this. We could say, what are you trying to express about yourself when you decorate your body one way or another? Or we could say, what do you observe about yourselves and about other people through the way they appear? What do you think when you see somebody dressed one way or the other, one of your peers, once they decide to get dressed a certain way? Whatever it is, the fingernail, what do you think? Does it make you uncomfortable? What do you think of that person when you see? We could start having a conversation like that, and in fact the same kinds of questions could be asked about music, about dance, about language, the kind of language that is deemed not acceptable in schools for some reason. We could ask, okay, why is that? Why is there one language for school and one language for the street and one language for the workplace? And we could start to pick apart the cultures. In doing that, what we're really doing is we're acknowledging that there are different cultures in schools. And we're getting students to participate in that conversation in a way that's really not immature. It's really very mature to start to figure out those things. Not only that, adults will learn something from the conversation. I think from a conversation like that, I learn a great deal. So now let's look at another area where students often have something to say, which is that of curriculum and instruction. WKCD administered a small grant program this last year called Students as Allies. We funded groups of students in 5 cities, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, Oakland, and St. Louis. And we funded them to survey their peers. These students went out and did surveys, focus groups, and other inquiries with their peers about what would make their schools more effective. And then they worked with the adults in the schools to produce an action plan to change some of the things. In several sites, students asked peers how much difference various items would make in the support of their learning. And that list that they made up included real-world applications. That was one of the things. Another was one-on-one attention from teachers. One was more challenging classes. How much difference would that make? More parent involvement. How much difference would that make? And across the board, across the sites, real-world learning was something that 53% of students said would, quote, help a lot. Of course, we know that in this current school climate, that's a rather unfashionable mode of teaching because it doesn't actually necessarily contribute to doing well on a test that is asking you content area questions about a very narrow spectrum of knowledge. And high school teachers are under the gun right now, and a lot of them are moving away from these real-world applications for that reason. But we can't dismiss it. We need to think seriously about what these kids are saying, otherwise we're going to get kids like Vance who drop out of school so that they won't have to take the high-stakes exam and instead go home and read Stephen Hawking. So we have to think about it. Louise, Rosa found this passage in Fires in the Bathroom, and she thought that it had a lot to say to that, this passage that Louise, who comes from Oakland, what I would say, he's probably considered a failing student in his Oakland school. And here's what he says about real-world applications.
In biology, we had to go outside and plant and measure it, draw it, see what kind of plant it was. When we were learning to find the area and the perimeter in math, we went outside to measure the school. It was more fun than in the classroom, and we learned it too.
So what would you say about that, Rosa?
I really liked this quote in particular because I feel that I'm still a teenager, I guess. When high school students are in class, we need some energy. We need to get up and we need to walk around and we need to interact with the things that we are learning about. And this is just, a great example of how a student can directly tell a teacher, this is what you need to do to make my learning to make my learning more dynamic and to be challenged, basically. And I think I really think that is a way to learn, to have interaction with the things that we're learning and to get up and do things and have some energy to continue learning.
So Vance, who is another student that worked on Fires in the Bathroom, made a small audio tape of his comments about this, and we're going to listen to 3 tracks of this. First, these two, which are about 1 minute each, in which he talks about this same question.
The smart teachers, they sort of turn it around, and they find the smallest reason, like you might need math, or you might need science, or you might need something like, oh, you're going to be the artist? Oh, well, how are you going to draw? You can't draw a straight line without geometry. Or what if you become some big shot art guy or big shot rapper? Who's going to count all your money? You don't want to get ripped off. And then we sort of like begrudgingly like listen to it because it makes sense. If you have asthma and then learning about the pulmonaries and learning about your lungs, that's something you know. You know you have troubles with your breathing. Your mom has diabetes. Your dad has a bad heart. That's how you're connecting it. I think it's helpful when a teacher knows where you're coming from or it actually takes the time to like learn about you or what your interests are, because it's easier for them to like connect with what they're teaching to how something you'll be interested in. Well, after I got out of junior high, I've been to 2 high schools. The first one I went to, it was like a big school. It was hard because the focus was on like the high school exit exams to get out, and there was a lot of pressure on the teachers to teach it to us and like just teach us the test so we could pass it. And because if we didn't pass it, then they didn't keep their jobs or something. Even the teachers there, they still cared about their work, but every time there was a spark or something would start to happen, you could feel it. You feel like kids getting interested. It felt bad. It felt sad. It's like, okay, no, we have to go back to the text. We weren't the only ones who were disappointed. They were disappointed too because, they don't want to like just teach the book any more than we want to learn it. My second school, the second high school I went to, was a lot smaller. And there, it was more about just learning. The pressure was off, basically, for just passing this big test that decided your whole future. There, it was more about your life. That one test didn't make your life. Just learning the curriculum and learning every different subject, that helped you with your life. One test wouldn't break you.
Vance was among the many students in Fires who talked about why they do or do not participate in class. And here's what he said about that.
My hardest subjects have always been like science and math. And I remember like one time I was in a chemistry class, and I had just read this book. I just picked up this book by Stephen Hawking about the origins of the universe and things. And the teacher was talking about how light travels in packets and how you could like use light to change different chemicals, the composition of certain chemicals. So I asked the teacher, so could you theoretically use light to change a chemical into anything? And he just basically like shut me down right there. He's like, no, that's science fiction. And then he just went on with the class. That was the only thing I had. I mean, I was thinking about that all night. I was so excited because I read something that I thought had to do with the class. And him just shutting me down like that, that discouraged me. And I just like put my head down.
So in this area, again, in curriculum and instruction, the students that we funded to do research found some very interesting discrepancies in what between what adults believed and what students believed. For example, teachers in their surveys reported that they talked to kids about their academic work and class participation, but students didn't report that. In fact, in Chicago, 80% of the teachers said they brought up classroom participation and good academic performance often in one-to-one conversations with students. 80% of the teachers thought that. 27% of the students said that their teachers often talked to them one-on-one about the subject. So 70% of the teachers there reported that they often explained to individual students how to complete a homework assignment. And only 33% of the students said their teachers had that conversation with them. So I thought I would ask Bernice and Rosa what these discrepancies could possibly mean, in your opinion.
Well, what I thought one of the discrepancies could be caused by is that a lot of students feel that when they're having a conversation with their teachers, that the teacher is lecturing at the student rather than conversing with the student and learning from the student and teaching the student at the same time. And the student doesn't really hear that the teacher is trying to teach them. It's more like a lecture and the teacher's talking at them rather than trying to understand where they're coming from.
Right, I have a similar comment also. Well, sometimes teachers just say something briefly in class. They don't really talk one-on-one frequently with students to find out what are their worries or their concerns about every assignment. Perhaps it will be very hard and time-consuming to ask every student that all the time. But there is a huge discrepancy in the percentages, so that tells something that there's not that much communication, and what teachers think is not actually what students are getting. And also, we also have to think about the students. We don't want to blame the teachers all the time. Maybe students are not paying attention, or perhaps they don't understand, or maybe they can't conceptualize what a conversation means in terms of teachers, basically. So those were kind of some of my responses to that.
So are you saying that what a student might think a conversation is might not be what a teacher might think a conversation is?
Exactly.
Or another thing that I thought of is teachers might be having that conversation a lot in their days, but maybe just with the same few students. So that 80% of teachers might be having frequent conversations with 27% of students, which leaves a lot of students out. Or they might be talking to lots of students, in fact, but only once. And maybe it seems like they're talking a lot to students, but in fact, when you have 120 students to teach and you're doing some one-on-one conversations with a lot of them, then it can be maybe blur together. Here's another angle on classroom instruction before we leave this subject. Let's listen to Laura Liz. She's one of the students that helped write Fires in the Bathroom, and she talked at length about her highest priority in the classroom, which was keeping the teacher from paying attention to her. So Rosa and Bernice are going to take turns reading the different things that Laura Liz said. Go ahead, Rosa.
When I don't know the material, I don't even ask questions. I'm like, I might as well wait till the student next to me answers the question and I just fill it in. When I know the answer, I would like to say it, and sometimes I raise my hand a little. But this one girl in my class always knows the answer, and the teacher goes to her automatically and calls on her instead. I don't want to be the one that's always shouting out the answers.
I don't want people to hear me talk because I don't want people to notice me. I have this fear that people judge me for every little thing. I stutter when I'm nervous, so it's a big thing for me, or I'll say a word wrong.
I have a teacher who shoots down questions because he thinks it's not an important question, and he wants to continue on with the lesson. It's like he thinks I'm not very important.
I learned a technique so my teacher won't call on me. I look preoccupied when taking notes or reading the pages being discussed. I'm like, don't disturb me, I'm working on this.
So I have to ask myself if Laura Liz's teachers might be teaching her differently if they realized all these things. If they realized that she really doesn't want her teacher to notice her, and at the same time she does want the teacher to think she's important, and she's very sensitive to what the teacher thinks of her and to what her peers think of her. And it's possible that she would tell her teachers about those things if they made it safe for her to talk about it. So moving on from the area of curriculum and instruction, I thought we could talk a little bit about the big questions of school structure. And I'm sure you know that all over the country right now, large high schools are thinking about or trying to break up into smaller high schools because small high schools have been pretty well shown to be better for kids without privilege for lots of obvious reasons. Among them, what we're talking about tonight, that students get to be known better by their teachers. In the Bronx, this has been a big initiative in the last couple of years, and a couple of years ago I worked with Rosa and about 20 other students on a small book that they wrote by students for other students about that process. And for the first time, really, a lot of these students got a chance to say what they were thinking about that process of breaking big schools into small. And Rosa and Bernice are going to read some of the things that different students said.
Zorania says, when they opened a small school with 9th graders on the 4th floor of our high school, we felt bad because it was our chilling area where we would rest, talk, dance, share. We had to take classes in offices, and the rooms were so small. And when we went to visit our old teachers on the 4th floor, security officers would ask us for a pass and say, "What are you doing here?"
Livette says, I was jealous when the small school came to take our 4th floor. We lost our counselor and they gave me a new counselor, and I was so mad. I didn't even know her name. It gets harder for the kids that are left behind in the big school, and they take it out on the small school. New small schools should give plenty of transition time so people are not losing their teachers and counselors.
Zorania tells us again, the problem is that we need to be aware of changes before. Don't let the plan be made just by adults. We need to know what's going to happen to agree on what's going on. Let us help decide. Let us approve.
And Minerva says, don't pretend that everyone has this big choice. In fact, students often don't have a choice between schools they might want to go to. It's not so much between big and small as between schools you might want to go to. Even though I wasn't excited about going to the new small school, I didn't want to go either to the other. I didn't want to pick the other choices. If you did apply to the other big schools, they were already overcrowded.
Janelle tells us, the planning team was supposed to include the voices of students, but there were so many teachers that we were rarely heard. We would say something and they would notice it, but then they would say something else.
We would say something and they would notice it, and then they would say something else and basically forget what we said. Like, okay, thank you very much, and here's what I think. And the adult voice always dominated. So, Rosa, you were there. What sense do you make of those quotes?
Yeah, actually, those were very good criticisms of the entire process, which nobody ever thought of in the planning team. Yes, they are very right. The students, well, I guess, yeah, bringing in small school is great. But we're forgetting about those students who are already in the building and feel isolated or at least left behind because they are not part of the new, exciting, small community that is building up in the school. And yes, they do lose staff and they do feel that they have been kind of invaded by this new process, and they're not part of making those decisions, I guess. And it is a very complicated thing to do, but that's how it works. And usually, I'm not sure if I agree with the fact that students maybe do not really have a choice, but I guess Vivette brings a good comment on choices. And after all, I mean, there's a limited number of choices, so you have to pick. So in the long term, maybe you don't have that big of a choice. But it is, I guess, especially for the students in the Bronx who do not really have the chance to go to schools in other boroughs. They feel that they're kind of stifled and they have to pick between A from Z small school, and maybe they're not ready for it, and perhaps adults need to actually talk about that transition. Well, this is our small school and this is what we're thinking of, instead of saying, we're great, we want to sell this school to you, it's going to be good for you and you have to come here. And when students are there, they feel that they don't really belong there, they don't want to be there, but yet adults think it's a good thing. You have to do it, basically.
And it seems as if students don't want a school to work out, they have a lot of power to make sure that that school doesn't work out. So, for lots of reasons, if you're going to make a big change in the structure of a school, it makes just practical sense to let students know in plenty of time that you're considering this change and involve them in talking it through and investing themselves in making it a way that they might want it to be. It takes time, it's harder, it's not very efficient, but otherwise you're going to have a pretty serious obstacle if you've got a lot of kids that think, this is not where I want to be. Finally, if you ask them, teenagers will also talk about the most important issues that any school faces, issues of race, class, ethnicity, ability, expectations, and different treatment of different people. Very often when I talk to adults, when I used to interview adults more than students about teaching in urban schools, adults would talk a lot about order, limits, basic skills, remediation, a kind of keep them in line attitude, this making the school safe, making the school disciplined, very strong emphasis on control. But the kids I talk to in urban schools perceive it quite differently. And they really are quite aware of the contradictions when more is expected of some kids than others. In Oakland, California, I talked to a lot of students at Oakland Tech. I spent a number of days there. And one of the students, whose name was Danisha, was enrolled in a very powerful leadership class at Oakland Tech. And I'm going to ask Bernice to read what Danisha had to say about this subject of expectations.
Oakland Public Schools don't expect you to go to college because you're not supposed to go to college. You are meant not to go to college. You are meant to walk out of school. You are meant to go to the donut shop. You are meant to struggle. We have a donut shop across the street, and a lot of people cut to go to the donut shop. You are meant to do those things. At every school, they claim that they don't want you to cut, but at every school you will find an open door. A student cannot do anything about that. The only thing a student can do is choose the right course to take and stay in class and get their education.
We adults assume that the work of systemic change is our work to do, because we're the system, right? But kids can be just as involved and just as sophisticated if they have a place in systemic change. And Danisha talked about that too.
Go to the district and make a change, you say. It's possible in Oakland, but it's the whole fact that youth got to be prepared to take the responsibility of making that change. It's not easy to make change. You got to stick to it, and oftentimes as youth, we feel that we can't do it, so we just give up. Facts. You need facts. You need information. You need to be educated on what the administration is doing wrong, because you can't just go up to somebody and not know what you're talking about. You need to be educated on what they say they're doing and what students say they're doing. You got to keep going to meetings and not let anybody run over you. You got to be willing to study the information. You got to be willing to survey. You got to be willing to ask people about it. You got to understand.
So in many ways, Bernice herself embodies all these issues, because with the project that she initiated at Brighton High School with a number of other students, that project combines in many ways all the things we've been talking about tonight. It was definitely real-world learning, for example, because the students themselves came up with an issue that they were really interested in, a subject they cared passionately about in their own lives, and set about documenting evidence. They decided that they noticed that their classes were not as challenging as the classes that were offered to students at nearby suburban high schools. And they decided to do research into that. So WKCD gave them a small grant, and with that grant they made a video that we're going to see in just a minute. It definitely deals with race and class issues. It has to do with what expectations adults have for students. It has to do with systemic change. Let's take a look at, this will take about 7 minutes to look at several tracks from this video. The whole video is about half an hour long, so I won't show it to you, but I'd like to show the first part, which is where they explain how they got the idea for the project, and then 4 short parts, including the end part, which shows their results from it.
There's too many of you to cry.
We started thinking about this project a few months earlier in September. A couple of students in our student leadership class were having a discussion about college and the percentage of students that go on to college. And me and a couple of students were just really shocked. I was just shocked at how low the percentage was of students at our school that went on to higher education. It was just baffling. All these questions came to my mind, and I was just wondering, well, why don't these students want to learn? What's going on? Is there a problem in the school? We need to find out what's going on.
Maybe when I get to college, I won't know enough because I have all these kids that are better than me. Maybe my school isn't good enough. Maybe the education I'm getting is not good enough. What if I'm compared to the schools? I'm not learning nothing.
And what really going to other schools and finding out what opportunities other students are getting, it made me realize what opportunities I'm not getting at my school.
They don't teach you different ways. They just teach you the way they learn. It's just plain out simple. And then when you don't get it, they want to put you down sometimes. They put you down. You can memorize a rap video, but you can't memorize it.
Well, I expect my teacher to encourage me and tell me to do the best that I can do. To at least challenge me and give me some work based on the overall class or what their overall thought of the class. That's the work that they give you. They don't know you as an individual.
I feel that teachers represent probably any other subset of the population, that there are those who are really good and those who aren't so good, and then a lot of people in the middle. Would probably be, I feel, the most honest way to talk about teachers. The teachers who are good are people who I would argue are that way in everything they do. They don't know to do anything other than their best at whatever they do. They feel it's an obligation, and therefore they put the time in because that's the kind of people they are.
There's quite a few teachers in the school, as a matter of fact, that I like because they do care.
Yeah, I feel that some teachers just don't care. Like, I just feel that some teachers are here for the check.
They're just here to collect the check. They don't care about the students. They care about the money.
You make someone care even less when you tell them, either way, I get paid for this.
It helps you to learn. If you have a teacher that's open with you and willing to help, not there for the money or there, just to be a teacher or whatever, gotta love what you do, and teachers do that here, they love what they do here.
Teachers that interact with each and every student, I feel as though they're gonna get better results as towards what they want to accomplish.
Some teachers, you definitely feel as though they are out to make you pass, and then they are out if you do not pass the class and if you do not do well, they feel as though they have failed too.
Just think about it.
You come from a middle/upper class white town, you gotta go to college. Yeah, teachers here, since they assume that you're going to college, are going to teach you about specific college skills that you'll need. If they assume you're not going to go to college, then they're not going to teach you about college stuff.
Like if you write an essay that's supposed to be a 5-page essay, and you write 3 pages, you'll get by with it.
You can fold your homework up and put it in your pocket. You don't even have to bring a book back to school.
The teacher will assign homework, and they'll say, okay, this is what the homework is going to be, and if you do it, tomorrow we'll check it. There shouldn't be an if there, but there always is. I don't think any of my teachers expect us to actually do the work. And I think it's because the teacher's expectation is so low of us that they just feel that that's what we need. If you know you don't have to do something, why are you going to do it?
People say you need to get prepared right now for college. We're not prepared. So why are you not helping us? You're giving us A's and we get A's and B's is not doing nothing.
It ain't B is
we look good right now.
School.
And then they wonder why most black kids or Spanish kids, whoever go to schools here, all we think about is sports. But that's the only good thing we have here is sports.
They expect us to go far enough as that we graduate, but I don't think they have too many high hopes and I know he's going to go to Harvard one day, he's going to be great. I don't think they have those type of expectations of us.
In our school, it's more or less, you finish with high school, are you going to get a job, are you going to join the military? There must be other options out there for you besides college. And that's wrong. That's wrong when your teachers are not motivating you to go on and above.
I noticed since I got here, I've gotten lazier and I don't want to do work. So when they just give me work to get by, I know it's wrong, but I kind of just don't say anything. I think I fell into the system or something. It makes you believe that doing enough work to get by is okay, and that you shouldn't challenge yourself. You should just do what they tell you to do so you can just hurry up and get out. That's what they basically are doing. They're trying to just hurry up and push you out of high school so they don't have to deal with you anymore.
It's just training for the workforce. 8 hours a day. Basically, the government's just trying to train you to sit in one place and do simple, operations for 8 hours a day to get you ready for the workforce.
It hurts the students when teachers show expectations in different ways. Some kids will then just give up and not try because they feel like the teacher doesn't care or they do well.
So if you hear your teacher telling you, the people that taught you what you know, telling you that, that you're not going to go anywhere, you're going to start to believe it. Because those are people you almost look up to. Outside of family and friends, you're with them 6 hours a day, every day. So those are people that you're real close to. And if they don't have high expectations of yourself, it's going to be hard for you to have them for yourself either. So,
in fact, if you want to ask me, most of the kids are not prepared for college.
I feel more than prepared for college.
Oh, make me wanna holler the way they do my life. Make me wanna holler the way they do my life.
I think if a student comes to school, the student wants to learn. The majority of the students here do want to learn.
Wasting time in the end of the lines.
students are raising are risky questions. They have to do with complicated questions of culture, class, gender, ability. But if we're going to make schools places of learning for adolescents, we have to start now taking the risk of hearing their voices more clearly, learning about their culture, their point of view, and then acting on what we hear. I'd like to open now the conversation to questions. I don't know how much more time we have, but questions for me or questions for Bernice and Rosa. And thank you very much. Yes.
Hi, my name is Shannon Odie. I'm a public school teacher in Dorchester, and the title of your book spoke to our school because Dorchester High broke up into 3 small schools last year. We had 6 fires in the bathrooms in the first semester as the students, like you were saying, Rosa, as the students were feeling that they were like just taking on this ride, and now in these schools for entrepreneurship and business that had no interest in whatsoever. And as a teacher in one of those systems, I was wondering if the information that you gather from the students, when you take it back to the teachers, are the teachers, I mean, I'm kind of hearing this feeling like, yeah, exactly, that's what we've been saying. Are you finding that the voices that the students have when they're taken to administration or to the decision makers, the powers that be, are those some of the same issues that teachers are raising, or how do those, two groups come together?
In my own work, my work is taking the voices of students and making books out of them. And then I do hear that the books are read by and used by numbers of teachers. In fact, in Houston, the 10th grade teachers assign the book to their 10th grade English classes and have students write their own version of it, which is apparently very successful activity. In the grants, where WKCD asks students to do their own research and then work with adults on bringing it to the administration, part of the grant is bringing it to the school, the adults in the school. And the teachers in those cases have been actually very receptive to that information and have made a lot of changes. I think the challenge is to do something. It's not enough to listen to student voices. It's really, you can't listen to them and then say, okay, thank you very much, that's enough. Now, you have to really include in the listening process the making of a plan. And it can be something really quite small. In one school, where the teachers learned that the perception of the students as to how much their teachers knew them was quite different from their own perception, the teachers put a chart of all the kids in the school up on the faculty room wall and asked each other to make an X by the name of any student that they knew. And then they found out how many students nobody knew. In another school, a principal decided to have drop-in hours at a certain time every day, just when he would be in his office, and said, drop by if you have a problem with anything. I'm here. This is my time for listening to students. They can be small steps, but they can mean a lot in terms of opening up communication. Good question. Yes.
Well, I had a particular experience working with one of the committees to start one of the small schools in New York City a year ago. So I was very, very lucky to find people who really, really cared about listening to students. There were 2 students in this committee, and I think what matters is if adults really pay attention, and like Kathleen said, if they really try to take their ideas as just as important as anybody else in the team. And I feel that I was treated like anybody else, just like the teacher next to me, just like the lawyer next to me. And I really felt that I had that empowerment, that I had power in that community, that I was bringing some of the ideas on the sides of students. And I guess we need more of that. We need to ask students to come and sit at the table, and let's not just listen to you, but let's have a conversation. Let's write down together basically what we're supposed to do here that is making schools better for you and for teachers too, to teach.
Good evening, and thank you so much for sharing. It's been so enlightening, particularly for me. I do research in the Boston public schools on children and technology and literacy, and to hear someone else giving voice to the children, to the students, to the youth, our future, is just really amazing. And I just had just a couple of questions, brief ones. I just wondered if you had any problems gaining entry and access to the students, and what types of things did you have to go through? Were you subject to the institutional review board? You know, and if you had English language learners in the class, and if there were issues with parents maybe understanding what you were trying to do, or even teachers wondering if this was even valid. So from the researcher end, and then from the student end, you've addressed several areas here this evening. I'm sure in the book that I'm looking forward to reading you address even more, but I'm just wondering if you touched on the issue of the digital divide, and what, as young folks, are you thinking about technology in your schools? Do you feel like it's helping you? Is it really adding to your quality of life? That I would be interested in hearing about that. Thank you.
Bernice, why don't you talk about the digital divide first?
Well, after interviewing some of the students for my project in particular, a lot of the students voiced concern about not having enough of the computers and the technology available to do the things that they wanted to do or that they were interested in. They did say that it would be very helpful, but they didn't have enough of it. For instance, there was one student who worked on this project who did the photography and the camera work, and he was in a filming class that we have at my school, and they would often complain about not having enough cameras to go around for them to do their individual projects. So it is a concern for most of those students who want to go into filming that they are not able to have hands-on experience with that during high school because there's not enough to go around for each student.
Actually, also, I know that a lot of people are trying to get or give access to computers and technology to students in poor neighborhoods or inner city high schools. But there's another problem that comes along with that, and that is teacher training. Okay, once you have all the computers you want, and once you have all the cameras, who is going to teach that? And who is going to pay for that too? So there are other implications, and I guess making our schools better, like Kathleen says, involves so many people, and it takes a while, I guess. It's not just thinking, okay, this is a problem, let's solve it, and that's it. There are other things that come along with it, and you have to work with them little by little, I think.
The other question you asked about access to students, I operate a little bit less as a researcher and more as a journalist. That means I try and get my kids anywhere I can get them. I don't usually go through the schools directly. Sometimes that happens, but usually I reach out. Since I wrote about high schools for a long time, from the adult's point of view, I do know a lot of people that I've in schools, and when I'm starting a new book, I usually reach out to them and I say, here's the kind of student that I want to be talking to. The student has to be willing to speak, has to be willing to speak honestly. I don't want the best students, although I want a mix of students. I want students who are struggling in school, and students whose voices have not been heard. Don't send me your entire student council. And then I try to meet with the students outside of school. We meet on weekends usually, or vacations, school vacations. I pay the students. High school students, I pay $9 an hour. I try to match the wage, the best wage that they could be otherwise getting, because many of these students have jobs. I try to match or make it slightly better so that it's really worth it to them to show up to talk to me rather than to go work at wherever they're working. I get their permission. If they're not 18, I get their parents' permission. If they're English language learners, I go out of my way to make sure their parents understand what's going on through translators. And after I take their voices, I record all their voices. At the first book, Fires in the Bathroom, I actually sat there and typed while they were talking, and which was good because it slowed them down. And I could stop them and I could say, wait a minute, here's what you just said. Is that what you meant to say? I would read it back to them and they would correct it. After that, my fingers got very, very, very tired. And now I tape record what they say and have it transcribed. After I basically cut and reorganize their quotes into chapters and make the points that seem to me to come out of their voices, I send each student that I've interviewed the entire manuscript at the end when I have the draft manuscript, and I ask them to read the manuscript and critique it, and in particular to read their own quotes and get back to me if there's anything that they want to change, because sometimes we say things that we didn't really mean or that would embarrass somebody that we care about. I use their own real names, their first names, unless they want me to use a pen name, in which case I use a pen name, their first name. I put a brief bio in the back. In other words, I treat them more or less as co-authors, with me doing the lion's share of the writing and organizing work. From time to time, I make a contact with a school which will be interested in having me come just to that school and do something, but that's the rare situation. And essentially, I'm looking above all for students whose voices are not heard, because there are plenty of Westinghouse winners or what they are, Intel winners now. There are plenty of people who get a lot of attention for being superstars. I'm interested in students who are not working alone, number one, if it's a project that's happening with a mentor in a group with a purpose. And I'm interested in students in schools who don't otherwise get heard, students like Laura Liz. So wherever I can find them, I meet them on airplanes. No, I don't really meet them on airplanes. But I meet them anywhere I can find them. I invite them to and if I also invite them to bring their friends. I say, if you have a friend, sometimes I'll meet a kid who wants to come, and I'll say, so who else do you know that would be interested in talking to me? And then they'll bring friends. So it's just basically journalism. It's not. Once in a while, I contact a school for some reason, and they say, here's our protocol, here's our research human subjects protocol, and in those cases, I usually don't bother, because it's happened to me at Evanston High School in Evanston, Illinois. I guess they get interviewed a lot. Students there get interviewed a lot. I try hard not to exploit the students, but it's always a question. It's always a question. I mean, if somebody said to me, I think you're exploiting a student, I would take that very, very seriously and say, okay, tell me how. Tell me what I can do to change that. Let's make this fair, because it's really about the students' voices. And the books are copyrighted by What Kids Can Do. I'm an independent writer for What Kids Can Do. I'm on contract. So the royalties for the books go back into the work of What Kids Can Do and sustain its work for the future. Who else? Students. Do you think that this is true, you students who came from the Boston area? Did it ring true or not? Yes? Yes. You think it did. You want to say something about it? Teachers sometimes ask me, yes, what? Did you want to say something? Good. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
I was actually wondering why you feel that teachers need more student and environments are less motivated to teach them.
I don't think I said that. From the video, I see. Why does Bernice feel that? My own experience is not that. Some of my great heroes are teaching in urban schools. I have nothing but immense admiration for the real connectors with students who are teaching in urban schools. But Bernice's video, you want to comment on that?
Could you say that again, please?
Why in the video did it seem like you're portraying that teachers in city schools are not as willing to put their all into teaching than at suburban schools?
Okay. What I could say about that, and what I want to make clear is, and what I want to emphasize about the video is that it is the ideas of the students that we interviewed, not necessarily the ideas of our own. But what I can tell you from what they told me through interviewing them is that a lot of the students, they seem to have that same general idea from the urban schools compared to the suburban schools. And what I could infer from that, being from an urban school myself, is that there seems to be this sort of, I don't know, a tradition that goes with being from an urban school. Just someone bring up the fact that you're from an urban school, it's automatically assumed that, well, those kids are bad or something like that. So I think that to some of the students, and even sometimes I believe it myself, that some teachers might have this preconceived notion that certain students may not want to learn or may not be as motivated to learn as other students. So they might treat them differently.
Thank you very much. This has certainly been provocative. I'd like to put in one word for teachers. I'd like to see a companion video of teachers talking about their schools in a similar way, because I believe that the powerlessness that these students feel is also felt by the teachers in dysfunctional organizations like the schools in which many of you have to deal. It's interesting that the speakers who talked about schools where people cared were from private schools or from affluent communities. When there is dysfunction in a system, it's not just the students who feel the dysfunction, it is the teachers as well. So I would just love to see a companion video. I wish the teachers' voices were heard as brilliantly and beautifully as the video showed on these students. I would imagine that there would be parallels that you would see, which would be very powerful. I just want to recommend a book that my husband recommends to me. It's a book that was published in 1954. It's called The Mental Hospital. And the section that my husband always relates to me is this part about powerlessness, how in a mental hospital, it's not only the patients who feel powerless, it's everyone. The dysfunction spreads everywhere. And so I think listening to voices of students is so powerful. But I believe we also have to listen to the voices of others in these systems and to recognize that it's not teachers. I mean, as you said before, it sounds like the teachers are the bad people there. I think in a way everybody in a system like this is a victim. And how powerful it is to hear the students' voices. I hope that someday you'll make videos about the teachers. Thank you for a very powerful evening. Thank you for coming, and it's so wonderful to have students here in the audience and on the stage. And thank you, Kathleen, for making this all happen. Good evening, and go home to the Red Sox.